All right, it's just me and Craig. Let's do this, Craig. Let's see if anybody shows up. And I think this is going to be episode 17. I can't even imagine how long this is going to be when it's all said and done. Everyone, if anybody's following along in this, because yeah, we're in chapter 2, the end of chapter 2. So it's going to be quite the project. I'm really enjoying it. So yeah, we started getting into the suttas actually at the bottom of chapter 2. And I had started this, or I should say, I had finished off the last episode with the first sutta from chapter 2. And these are all associated with the subheading is the discovery of the path. And so, Bhikkhu spent some time, right, just like his kind of organizational structure of the book. He started off the chapter with an explanation of this process, kind of giving it some context, and now we're getting into the actual suttas that kind of deal with the discovery of the path. So this is Sutta 27 at the bottom of page 79. Monks, I lived in refinement, utmost refinement, total refinement. My father even had lotus ponds made in our palace, one where red lotuses bloomed, one where white lotuses bloomed, one where blue lotuses bloomed, all for my sake. I used no sandalwood that was not from Varanasi. My apologies, but perhaps that is a reference for people from this region that you will understand. I'm looking forward to looking it up, and I'll drop that into the Discord server. I used no sandalwood that was not from Varanasi. My turban was from Varanasi, as were my tunic, my lower garments, and my outer cloak. A white sunshade was held over me day and night to protect me from cold, heat, dust, dirt, and dew. Wow. Wow. Okay. So in the West, there's a term that if you're a Westerner, I think that it might you might be able to radically align with it, And there's a gentleman, whose book I really, really like, and it was one of the impetuses for me to go back to school and get my doctorate actually in media psychology, and it's called The Coddling of the American Mind. Coddling, that word coddling, right? And so that's what I'm thinking of right here. So it sounds like Siddhartha, when Siddhartha was still Siddhartha Gautama, and we've talked about this before, right? He was born into the warrior class. It was a caste system, right? So he was of very high birth, high rank. From a Buddhist perspective or a Hindu perspective, I at least know this much about it, right? That you could say that his karma had, had fruited. And here he is kind of being born into this incredible wealth, wanting for nothing, and also being wholly protected and sheltered. That was a word that was used often from when I was a young person back in the 80s. We wouldn't use the word coddling or snowflake, some of these words that we hear today, but you'd hear sheltered. And it was kind of the same idea that here's someone who had zero exposure to the realities of life, right? That never had to experience really any war, any violence, any death, any sickness, any illness. He was protected from hunger, from any kind of physical discomfort. He was sequestered away, and so that's what I'm taking from this. So love it. It's. I know that it's not like we had tape recorders 2,500 years ago, right? This was an oral tradition, so but if this is in fact really in alignment with Buddha the teacher, I love how he starts his stories. He really knows how to deliver an attention getter. Okay. I did not grow up like this. I had the opposite childhood. Yeah, the complete opposite. So, but I've met people like this. I've definitely met these people. I see these people online, on TikTok, right? We've seen these people. Yeah, we see these people all over the place, right? Yeah, all over the place. I had 3 palaces, one for the cold season, one for the hot season, one for the rainy season. During the 4 months of the rainy season, I was entertained in the rainy season palace by minstrels without a single man among them. And I did not once come down from the palace. I had to go and pause and go do a little bit of research on this because, this line right here is so, the cultural context is so critical here. And I definitely had some pretty strong ideas about what I thought was meant. And, I suspect that I was right, which is this idea that, women were, that was kind of the role of the female, to provide this kind of entertainment, this kind of perhaps subservient entertainment. So again, one could look at this and say, this is really interesting to me. And we've had this conversation actually on the Discord server as well. One could look at this and say, oh yeah, well, then Buddhism isn't real, or it's not a legitimate path, or it's not a legitimate, approach to doing life. Because, I mean, come on, man, look at Buddha. I mean, so, Buddha's, first of all, he's not Buddha here yet, right? But he participated in this, right? Well, yeah, we participate, right? We're asleep. We participate. We humans have participated in all kinds of atrocities, right? And not just white European Homo sapiens. Okay, actually, humans are quite violent. We're actually quite a violent species. I know it's a hard pill to swallow. It's part of this idea of life being suffering to a certain degree. So one could look at it that way, and far be it from me to, I would never, this is not to cast any, just, judgment on someone who chooses to, turn their nose up at all of this and hearing this. I get it. I'm a woman. I have experienced over-sexualization and sexual objectification my entire life. I don't experience it anymore because I'm in my 50s now, and so I'm not sexy to guys. Yeah, it's a hard truth. I hate to say it, but you don't get looked at as much, ladies, and it's kind of great in a way, and it's also been great for my ego. But I digress. So the way I choose to look at it is, yeah, that's why I like Buddhism. I also think that perhaps it is this life, right? This life, right, where he says, I was entertained in the rainy season palace, right, protected from the rain, and had his mind occupied for him so that he never had to be bored. Any of this sound familiar, by the way? And with minstrels without a single man among them. So the titillation of feminine prowess here. And it makes me wonder, and again, this is where I would just love to talk to a scholar. It makes me wonder if this was one of his motivations for. Well, we're going to get it. We're going to get into all of the rights later, but right mindfulness, right the rights, and Buddha has some pretty clear ideas about even a layperson's relationship to sexuality. And it's not for everybody. Okay, again, it's like, hey, we live at a time now where, right, it's like a smorgasbord of religion and philosophy and all kinds of things that you can use. My brother calls them tools. They're just tricks. No, he calls them tricks, mental tricks, right, that you can pick. In Buddhism, we would say just frickin' pick one and stick with it because the mind is a trap, and it will keep you bouncing from trick to trick to trick just to sabotage you. So, know when you've been beat, know when you've been licked, know when you don't have free will, know when you're being gamed. I feel like I'm going way off the rails, but I'm just going to keep reading. Whereas the servants, workers, and retainers in other people's homes are fed meals of lentil soup and broken rice. Yeah, that's kind of more how I grew up. In my father's home, the servants, workers, and retainers were fed wheat, rice, and meat. Right? So we're clearly seeing the caste difference here, right? We're getting another snapshot into how the Buddha grew up before he went off and threw everything away, everything that today so many of us become egoically identified with, how much money we make, what car we drive, what brand we're wearing, right? Even think about, we talked about this before about intention, right? Notice if you name drop and ask yourself why you're doing it, right? It's all part of this. It's all part of the same fabricated kind of egoic clinging. It's all kind of the same shtick here. Even though I was endowed with such fortune, such total refinement, the thought occurred to me. When an uninstructed, run-of-the-mill person, himself subject to aging, not beyond aging, sees another who is aged, he is repelled, ashamed, and disgusted, oblivious to himself that he too is subject to aging, not beyond aging. If I, who am subject to aging, not beyond aging, were to be repelled, ashamed, and disgusted on seeing another person who is aged, or aged, that would not be fitting for me. As I noticed this, the typical young person's intoxication with youth entirely dropped away. There is a reason, I think, to my mind, to my view, again, why every ancient wisdom tradition, every beautiful indigenous harvest of stories has something to tell or say about youth, about childhood. You can't go home again, right? What can't you go home again to? Childhood, innocence, unknowing what is now known. And this subject has come up so often, right? And one of the things I love about this server, and it also grates against me, okay? But understand, again, this what I get to work with in my practice, my anger, my clinging, right, is the byproduct of my lived experience, right? I'm a 53-year-old woman. I've seen a lot of life. I remember being in my 20s, and I'm very lean naturally, and I did modeling when I was younger, and now I'm in my 50s, right? And I don't get anything done to my face. Like I mean, I have tattoos, so there's no judge here. I'm not judging. Well, I'm not judging, but I'll also say, hey, why are you getting all of that stuff done? Because as long as if you're being really honest with yourself, as long as the intentions are self-compassionate, if you're getting all that done because on some level you think you can outrun death, well, you're putting yourself in a kind of suffering that I can't even begin to to convey. But far be it from me, and I would never even pretend to try to talk to this or speak to this to someone who's in their 20s or 30s, because you're not there yet. And so you'll see. You'll see when your body starts to sag and to age, and you start to get the lines, and even though you're working out like crazy and eating the same way, your body starts to put on weight, and your priorities start to shift, and you start to see that the attachment to our youth and our beauty that in some religious traditions would be called vanity, right? It drops away because it has to. Again, that wouldn't be something that we would do in Buddhism. We're not really into. That's very impermanent. The body's just it's gonna die, man. Meditate on your death. Meditate on how disgusting the body is, right? Buddha talks about this. So, anyway, even though I was endowed with such fortune, such total refinement, the thought occurred to me: when an uninstructed, run-of-the-mill person, himself subject to illness, not beyond illness, sees another who is ill, he is repelled, ashamed and disgusted, oblivious to himself, that he too is subject to illness, not beyond illness. And if I, who am subject to illness, not beyond illness, were to be repelled, ashamed, and disgusted on seeing another person who is ill, that would not be fitting for me. As I noticed this, the healthy person's intoxication with health entirely dropped away. Yeah. I love the subheading of these suttas, the discovery of the path. Here he is. He's waking up to the suffering that is inherent in being alive. And it's so funny in the West, we get so hung up over here. People who, have been exposed to Buddhism in the West via Westerners is, probably 90% of the people in the West who are practicing it, got it through another Westerner, right? They didn't actually get it from the source, from the original tradition. I'm not saying that not all of them are like that, but a lot of them. And I find it amusing. I'm just going to say it. I find it kind of amusing because there just seems to be this discomfort with the word suffering, and it's kind of a riot, really. It's kind of a riot. It's kind of getting back to this, what he's saying earlier in the sutta. It's like, wow, how sequestered and privileged do you have to be that uncomfortable with being in pain? Are you that? Yeah, I know it sounds judgmental, but it's hard not to be. I'm gonna tell you right now, man. If you haven't ever been exposed to any kind of struggle, it's really hard. I think for me or anyone who's struggled a lot in their life, and you're seeing that now in America, right? You're seeing kind of the rise of the populist movement right now. I'm a college professor. Okay, so I'm not of that quote unquote class, right? I am not of that class anymore. But even to my mind, it's like, wow, how? But it's not, if that's you, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. I think it's actually kind of sad, especially for all the people around you. I was just watching this documentary about, oh man, it's called Sharenting. And it's about people who started using their family life as a way to make money on social media, beginning with when their children were born and all the way up until their children are out of the house, and how flippant and kind of capriciously easily one of them just kind of brushes off how traumatized her, a lot of these kids who grew up that way are now, having their entire life against their will being shared in. To me, that's just the ignorance there is profound. That you would think that was okay, right? But we can only know what we know, and so the second mom in the documentary, she recognized that she's in a trap. She kind of got herself into a trap, wasn't making any money, kind of started with it, just the idea of it being temporary, and she got herself into a fix, right? Now she's got 3 kids, and now she's using all of them to make money, putting their whole lives up on social media for the whole world to see, right? Including the shadow side. But for people who've never experienced the shadow side, they can't imagine that it exists, right? Let them eat cake, pish posh. Oh, it can't be that bad. Huh. And then they're surprised, right? When people who are really have lived in the shadow side, maybe their whole life. Well, that's just like pouring salt on the wound. That's like slapping them in the face with smugness, right? There was a murder today. I think it happened in Wisconsin or Missouri or something like that. It was a man about my age, a little bit younger. And he was the CEO of a health insurance company. And he was just murdered gangsta style in cold blood, pop, 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 silencer. Took like a professional hit. And I'm watching the media today leverage this to segue into, well, I can understand why this would happen. They feel like they've been misrepresented. And it's interesting to me from where I'm standing, because, I'm in my 50s and have watched how, legacy media has avoided covering these stories my entire adult life. Yeah, this one's going to get political, y'all, but I don't know if anybody's listening to this anyway, so whatever. So weird things are happening in the United States now, right? And I think a lot of why liberals are horrified and surprised is because of this. And now is not the time to double down on your privilege, right? Now is the time to go, wow. Rather than being quick to be divisive and full of hate, right? Calling them stupid, uneducated, toxic men, right? I mean, you could play that game, sure, absolutely. I mean, we humans, we play those games all the time, don't we? I mean, in fact, that's pretty much most of what our TV content is, isn't it? Just people playing those unkind, hateful games with each other. I just keep wondering when y'all are going to get that you can't get there from there, that cause and effect, I also understand that some people want to see the whole thing burned down, and gosh, I have nothing to say to that. It's like, yeah, the fire of the mind and the tragedy of feeling and being left behind for decades and decades and decades and decades. And this is when I wish I could just take every single one of those people. This is when I wish I could just sit down with that person who decided to snuff out that guy's life in small town America. I wish I just could have sat down and introduced this person to Buddhism, because here's the thing, they'll find him and he'll go to prison for the rest of his life, maybe even beyond death row. I don't know. I guess it depends on the state. And all because he was a slave to his emotions. Maybe he was a dad. Maybe it was a woman. I don't know, man. I don't care. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. Because of this, we allowed it to get to this place. But we've been here before. And when I say we, I don't mean Americans. I mean Homo sapiens, Just look at history. We become arrogant. We get a taste of power, and because we're insecure and we outsource our power, we look to domination and Machiavellian control rather than looking to the inner work that we could be cultivating to kind of feel like what it really feels like to be free, And I get to say that because I know how I grew up, and you ain't got nothing on me. I'll tell you that right now. You ain't got nothing on me. And yet here I am. And for me personally, it was Buddhism, but it doesn't have to be Buddhism. It was a decision to not let the world take from me in that way. This guy, well, he could be completely dead inside, right? When I came to this practice, I was almost dead inside. I had enough life spark in me to, try to kill myself. And thank goodness I had a little bit of life left in me, because that got me help, But maybe this guy's just completely dead inside, in which case, yeah, kind of a lost cause, really, But if they're not dead inside, then not only will they be in prison for the rest of their life, but they'll have murder on their heart. Maybe they already have murder on their heart. And again, if they do have a lot of murder on their heart and they're still killing, yeah, they're dead inside. Lost cause. Unless somehow they break, right? We've talked about this before. Something happens, right? Something in Christianity, they call it grace, right? In Buddhism, they just call it fucking waking fucking up. And some people cultivate it. A lot of people cultivate it. Some people just have it. They just have it. I've had a couple. I'm assuming they came out of my bottom, my drug addiction bottom. I don't know. I will move on now because I've gone on too long about this. But I just wish that everybody could have this kind of moment of realization, because how remarkable that this kid, this young man, well, he wasn't a kid, he was a young man, and he left his family behind too. So it's not all, unicorn and fucking, rainbows. But the idea that even though he had grown up with this, that he could see this, that he could actually have any empathy for this is to me is, remarkable. And would suggest that, the Hindus would say, well, yeah, that's because it's his karma, man. Didn't matter, or they would say his wealth kind of is how he got there. I don't want to even get into that because I don't know enough about, I don't really know anything about Hinduism, but this passage right here is just, given what's happened here, and since the election, and this guy's getting assassinated, and the media here in the US using it now to virtue signal about how America has left behind the working class, as if the working class didn't already know that, and as if we also don't know that they're complicit in it, is remarkable to me. It's like where are the hidden cameras? Even though I was endowed with such fortune, such total refinement, the thought occurred to me. When an unstructured run-of-the-mill person, himself subject to death, not beyond death, sees another who is dead, he is repelled, ashamed, and disgusted, oblivious to himself that he too is subject to death, not beyond death. And if I, who am subject to death, not beyond death, were to be repelled, ashamed, and disgusted on seeing another person who is dead, that would not be fitting for me. As I noticed this, the living person's intoxication with life entirely dropped away. And again, I'm struggling with the language still, and so my apologies, but I'm just for now just going to say AN 339, but there's information about these in the Discord thread, and I won't say anything more about this because I've talked about this already so much, as does the Buddha, which is why it keeps popping up here in Bhikkhu's English translation. That you're gonna die, you're gonna die. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter how many honeys you've had sex with. It doesn't matter how many cars you drive. It doesn't matter how important you think you are, or how many names you drop, or who you've worked with or haven't worked with. You're not as important as you think you are. You're not as significant as you think you are, and you are going to die. And that's how we roll in Buddhism, baby. Boom! So yeah, I get why it's not for everybody. What I find interesting is that, and it's ignorance, and I don't mean this in a hateful way. I mean it like in the actual Webster's dictionary definition of what is ignorance, right? We cannot know what we don't know. Most people that I've met, when they find out, that I am a lay Buddhist, they have some ideas, as we've talked about before, and it's not their fault. It's the West is kind of not done a great job of transmitting the message. And notice I didn't say the right message. Buddha says that, but I'm not going to say that, man. No way. But at any rate, there seems to be this belief that that's giving up. I've heard this before. Yeah, but if you believe life is suffering and that you're just going to die, and that you should just sit around and like meditate on that, like, oh my God, I'm going to die and I'm so disgusting and I fart and I burp, and how is that helpful? Well, that's not at all what Buddhism is. That's again, that's maybe what you get out of the bottom of a Cracker Jack box. The Buddhist light Cracker Jack box. That's not at all even remotely what Buddhism is. In fact, I see it's the opposite of that. Like holy. I've been with people. I've been with person as they were exiting this life. And perhaps you have too. And if you haven't yet, you will. You'll see. Death comes for us all. When you make peace with this. And again, remember in Buddhism, and I've told you my relationship with, the supernatural aspects of Buddhism and kind of how I negotiate that. But let's say that it's all wrong. It's all wrong. It's all wrong, right? They're wrong, and there's no reincarnation. There's nothing, right? Let's say the atheists are right, right? Let's say I die, and I mean, I'd love to say I find out that they're right, but I'll have no consciousness, so how would I know, right? But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the atheists are right, and that there's just nothing, that we die. Um, and I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not any of that. So I'm not even going to try to pretend that I know any of the words. I'm just going to say that all of the things that make our brain work and the rest of our body work winds down, right? And the clock stops. And, we get buried or cremated or whatever. And, whatever. If we're cremated, it's just a bunch of ashes. Boom. That's it. Or maybe we're buried and then our body's going to rot. It's going to decompose. Worms are probably going to eat it. All that's going to happen. All of that's going to happen. All of that's going to happen. And isn't that just the way of things? Isn't that just the natural way of things? And, oh, hello. Welcome. So, yeah, I'm going to move on to Sutta 28. Here we go. Look at people in strife. I will tell you how I experienced terror. Seeing people floundering like fish in small puddles, competing with one another. As I saw this, fear came into me. The world was entirely without substance. All the directions were knocked out of line. Wanting a haven for myself, I saw nothing that wasn't laid claim to. Seeing nothing in the end but competition, I felt discontent. Wow. Yeah, I don't know if you're interested in this book. We're in chapter 2 now, and so, the last several episodes of the podcast are where I comment on this reading, on this particular English translation of the Pāli Canon. He's already spent quite a bit of time, talking about Buddhist biography, and I'm sure that he will continue to. And so in the sutta before this, he's talking about how it kind of occurred to him, despite his pampered, sheltered upbringing, it occurred to him that he saw his peers, his cohort around him, he saw the reaction to people who were dying, sick, struggling because of the aging process or the impermanence of the body, and how uncomfortable and disgusted they were by it. And he said that he kind of realized, and this is in the sutta that I just read, wait a minute, that's going to happen to me, man. Yeah, I mean, I might be like 29 right now, because I think that's about how old he was when he left his pampered, coddled little precious warrior class life and got serious. But in all seriousness, he was a young man. I'm 53. That's young. Okay, that's young from where I'm standing. That's young. So, I mean, that's incredible to me. And right before you got on the call, I was just commenting that. I'm like, wow, that is so radical. I mean, how many people do you think that, in modern language, I live in the United States, let's just call them trust fund babies, okay? It'd be the equivalent of a trust fund baby. Somebody who's never had to struggle or suffer or want for anything in their life. And all of their issues and dramas and traumas, not to say that they don't exist, but they are largely the kind that we create, according to Buddha, right? But somehow he was able to look through all of this and go, even though he had all this wealth and wanted for nothing and was never challenged or confronted with his own death or illness, right? Because his father made sure of that, and his mother made sure of that. Somehow, right? And in other ancient wisdom traditions like Christianity, right? You think about the Christ story, right? Although he had a very different upbringing, right? The opposite of Siddhartha, right? Born into poverty, and Siddhartha born into incredible wealth. The warrior class was like it. That was a trust fund baby right there. And somehow, though, how right? Somehow he saw through all this. By the way, I cuss a little bit. I hope that's going to be okay for you. Yeah, that's what I do. Right on. Thank you. I appreciate you. So somehow he had a moment and he was able to go, gosh, that's illogical. It's illogical to fear and make fun of and do all the stupid psychological things that humans do to deal with their own insecurities and fear. Right? We're idiots. We behave like fucking jackasses, right? And somehow he saw all of this, just the absurdity of it all, right? What, you don't think you're going to get old and die? What, you don't think you're going to lose your good looks and have wrinkles and not be attractive anymore? What, you think you're not going to have that happen to you? Please. And so he was able to see that. And I think that that's pretty amazing, And so that was the last sutta, and now he's saying, look at people in strife, right? Look, I didn't come up this way, but look at people who are, and before you got on the call, I was talking a little bit about how in the United States today, there was a CEO of a health insurance company in the Midwest, kind of small, Midwest town, I believe. I might be getting this wrong about exactly whether, what size the town was. And he was a little bit younger than me. He was 50. And someone just kind of pulled up next to him, got out of the car, shot him in cold blood, and drove away. And I was watching the news today about it, how they were covering it, and how they briefly mentioned the shooting, and then they spent the rest of the time talking about how this is how angry people are now. This is how much they feel like they've been forgotten, left behind. And of course, I had to get on there and, with the help of AI, to be mindfulness, write a comment saying, wow, CNN, how come you weren't covering this 50 years ago when it mattered? Yes, I realized I wasn't very mindful. But where I'm going with this is, somehow, even though he grew up the way he did, he saw the suffering. He felt it to the degree with such passion and terror, and you'll notice that he uses the word terror a lot, or at least the Pāli Canon uses the word terror a lot, and the Pāli Canon is not hyperbolic inherently. So, to my mind, anytime the word terror is using, I think it's a way for him to describe somehow he really experienced. I'm a psychologist, and so in psychology, when you're studying psychology, when you're studying, you're actually measuring empathy, right? There's 3 different kinds of empathy. I'm trying to remember. There's cognitive empathy. I don't remember what the middle one is. And then the last one, which is supposed to be considered the most emotionally kind of intelligent one, right? The one that we can ultimately cultivate. It's compassionate empathy. And somehow, Buddha here, Siddhartha here, right before he went off on his journey, this seemed to be the match that was lit for him. And, I guess in Christianity, maybe you would call this grace. How? How did that happen? And wouldn't that be great if that could happen to all trust fund babies and actually all babies everywhere? So, hey, thank you so much. Appreciate that. But, yeah, so here he's saying, look at these people floundering, compete. And he's also, and this is the other thing, and boy, go back and look at earlier sections, or listen to earlier episodes. Man, Buddha doesn't mince words about how he feels about, oh, God, how he feels about our ignorance. And here he's kind of bringing it up again. Look at how we compete with each other. Look at how kind of absurd the whole thing is. We're all going to get sick. We're all going to die. It's all so impermanent. What's it all for? Why are we treating each other this way? Why are we acting like this? Why are we acting like we have any fucking control? Right? It's like he had this incredible moment of prescient knowledge. Who knows how it happened? Who cares? Thank goodness, Buddha. And then he transmuted it. So, I'm glad he felt discontent. You go back and you look at the last chapter where Bhikkhu's talking about, he's talking about how he would decide what students he would and wouldn't work with. And he was very discerning, and discernment's critical in Buddhism. It's really, really important. And he was talking about how there were certain people that he just would not work with. And he was talking about how, why? What's the point? They're not hungry. They don't want it. They don't really want it. You have to really want it because it's hard. And to say that it's hard is an understatement. So I think, but he also, if you go back and you look at earlier sections, he also said that if he saw in the pupil that there was an eagerness, an urgency to learn, to know, that he would give it a shot. So anyway, I can see where his hard line, it's all making sense. I'm going to move on to Sutta 29. I too, monks, before my self-awakening, when I was still just an unawakened bodhisattva, being subject myself to birth, sought what was likewise subject to birth, being subject myself to aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement, sought happiness in what was likewise subject to aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement. The thought occurred to me, why do I, being subject myself to birth, seek what is likewise subject to birth? Being subject myself to aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement, why do I seek what is likewise subject to aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement? What if I, being subject myself to birth, seeing the drawbacks of birth, were to seek the unborn, unexcelled rest from the yoke, unbinding? What if I, being subject myself to aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement, seeing the drawbacks of aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement, were to seek the aging less, illness less, deathless, sorrowless, unexcelled rest from the yoke, unbinding? So at a later time, while still young, a black-haired young man endowed with the blessings of youth in the first stage of life, and while my parents, unwilling, were crying with tears streaming down their faces, I shaved off my hair and beard, put on the ochre robe, I'm not sure if I said that word right, and went forth from the home life into homelessness. Yeah. And again, before you got on the call, I was talking a bit because I was homeless when I was a kid. And so I think that's why we can't know what we don't know, right? Like he saw there's so many things that I respect about the Buddha, like he didn't quit, right? Like I'm sure it's very sexy when you're living up in a tower to think that it would be really sexy to shave your head and go sit, right? Like, because what do you know about it? Like, right? You've never been hungry. What do you know about it? I'm sure it sounds really, sexy and romantic and yada, 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 right? That's what someone who's actually grown up that way is going to say to you. Yada, yada, yada. Yeah, that's adorable. What I really like about Buddha, though, is he really did have radical humility about the whole thing, Like if you go and you just, he was very transparent about his own hubris, his own seeking, like he knew what, that's when you think about it, the first part of it all really was him seeking, the egoic mind seeking, right? I'm not gonna eat or sleep or bathe, and I'm just gonna try to, like barely keep myself alive. Well, there's a certain egoic edge to that, right? There's clinging to looking for results, cling. You're certainly not unbound. You're certainly not unhindered. And then of course, he also had, delightful avarice, right? He also had all the pleasures. And in the first chapter, and I can't remember which sutta it is, the Road to Radhaga, which is one of my favorites, because it's just so practical, where I think the student says to him, he's talking about how like he's frustrated, right? His student's frustrated because he's also teaching at this point, and he's frustrated because he can't get some of his students to wanna to actually develop, terror or real, authentic kind of inner implicitly motivated, genuine urgency. That's a word that is used a lot in this book. And I don't know if, that's the English translation. Urgency, 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 urgency. And so this guy's frustrated, right? He's like, wow, and I've been teacher for 20 years. I'm like, yeah, I get it. It's like, look, dude, look, this is college. You want to be on your phone in the back? Go for it. The rest of you guys, let's go do some fun stuff. Right. So, he was a new teacher. And so he didn't know this yet, right? He didn't realize that you can't make people do what you want. That's not human psychology. I mean, you could try, and maybe they'll do what you want out of fear, right? It's called authoritarianism, right? But wait, you can't make people follow the path, right? You can't make people take the road to Radhaga, if you were to look at that sutta, right? And so he's like talking to the Buddha, and he's like, well, what do I do, man? Like, what do I do? I don't want to do anything. And, the Buddha's just like, yeah. You just tell him, hey, see that road? Take that road and you'll be, you'll wake up. And, that's it. And the sutta goes on to explain that, there's going to be villages and beautiful, huge cities and culture and beautiful people full of love and laughter and joy. And this is, by the way, there's no judgment here. There's nothing wrong with any of this, right? But in Buddhism, right, specifically Buddhism, traditional Buddhism, what that particular sutta is getting at is it's not judging the going off the road to get shit-faced and party down, right? It's not a judgment. He was interested in enlightenment, right? So he would say, yeah, go for it. I did that too. That was part of my path too. I shaved my head and I didn't eat and I meditated constantly and basically whittled myself down to probably under 100 pounds. And that wasn't easing my suffering. And then I went and got my beer bong out and, snorted lines of Coke and did whatever else they did back in those days to check themselves out with complete Machiavellian mischief. And that didn't really give them any joy either, right? It didn't relieve him from that yearning, the urgency that is so often mentioned in the Pāli Canon. It didn't soothe, it didn't. And so that's kind of out of that, comes the middle way, So anyway, he sets off into the world, right? And his parents are sad and it's, off he goes. Having thus gone forth in search of what might be skillful, seeking the unexcelled state of sublime peace, I went to Alara Kalama and forgive my ignorance in terms of pronunciation and also my cultural ignorance. And on arrival said to him, friend Kalama, I want to practice in this Dhamma and discipline. When this was said, he replied to me, you may stay here, my friend. This Dhamma is such that an observant person can soon enter and dwell in his own teacher's knowledge, having realized it for himself through direct knowledge. Yes, I get yelly when I'm excited. This to me is one of the most radical things about Buddhism. When you think about how old Buddhism is over 2,500 years old. Listen to what he's saying right here. Listen to how radical this is. This is so radical. And this, by the way, this sentiment is repeated over and over and over and over again in Buddhist texts. See it for yourself. Follow no other. Follow no guru. Follow, right? In Buddhism, we do it ourselves. In Buddhism, we're creating our own reality. That's why we meditate all the time, to make sure that we're liking the reality we're creating. The fabricated state, the 5 aggregates. Yeah. Woo! Oh, man. So, yeah, and so I love this passage, right? And this is one of the things that I love about Buddhism. To me, it is truly a universal practice. I'm a Westerner. I'm also a recovering drug addict. And me, the moron that is called me, somehow happened upon this when I was probably around his age. Actually, what is it about? That's like it seems to be the hour, isn't it? The hour for humans. So often, so many stories, we're like in our late 20s, around 30, and there's like this the hero's journey, like fire is kind of lit under us. I think it's really interesting. Yeah, right. But it really is available to anybody. And I think, in this server, so often, when people will come in who are new to meditation and you'll hear these questions and it's just, oh, I can hear the, well, and I realize I'm projecting, right? So maybe it's not there at all. I'll just tell you what I think I'm seeing sometimes in the questions. It's just suffering. The questions from somebody who is not happy. Maybe they have ADHD. They're really, really anxious. They can't put their phone down. They can't. They're so, and so in Buddhism, right? That is incredible suffering. And to my mind, the good news is if you're willing, and again, this is a dangerous, I want to be very, very careful here by saying this, because before I actually really developed a serious meditation practice, I had been in therapy for many, many years. I had also got on the medication that I needed to, that I didn't need to be on forever, but for me personally, and that I'd also been in a 12-step program for, oh my goodness, quite a while at that point. So over a decade. So, sometimes I think when you hear people say that meditation is dangerous, yeah, it absolutely can be. It's, I like to say it's not for the faint of, I don't want to say, because that almost implies that it's like you're blaming someone who can't meditate. So I'm not going to use that expression because I don't want it to come across that way. Meditation is difficult, and it forces you to look at yourself. The good, the bad, and the ugly. It really kind of forces you to sit in the firestorm of your mind. And so I think that if you can become willing, and I don't even pretend to know what that's going to be for any individual who's listening to this podcast, beyond my friend here, but I have found through personal pragmatic practice, I've been practicing this in personal growth for 25 years, that not only has it saved my life, but my life is flourishing. And my life is flourishing because I've taught myself through disciplined practice to not be a slave to my thoughts. And yeah. And yeah. And I think regarding the plateaus, boy, do I hear you on that. And I can't speak for you, but I'll speak for me, because boy, do I ever get into plateaus too, right? And if you've been practicing a long time, yeah, like you're definitely gonna get, it's like, yeah, plateaus. And I'm a very type A personality, and so yeah, plateaus are hard for me, and that's when I can really notice, oh man, I'm looking for something right now. I can feel it. I can feel that I'm looking for progress. Why? There's nothing to get at. It's all impermanent. Where am I trying to get to? Sometimes I'll even have these questions with myself when I'm journaling, is where exactly is it that you think you're going? When I can feel this kind of, something's not right here in my practice, or I need to do something different, or I need to do something else. There's something very clinging in that Shempa, that's been talked about in here before, that hook, that why does it have to be different? Why do I have to get to the next level? Why is this and it's not even so much I'm a terrible person for thinking that way, not at all, right? It's more of to me, Buddhists are like documentarians or investigative journalists, but on themselves. That Buddhists are really interested in n equals 1 and they're the one. You know what I mean? It's very, very practical. You're not ever going to hear words, well, I can't, I have never come across, but also I'm not a scholar, okay? But I don't think that you're typically going to get ideas in Buddhism like evil and good. It's usually words like skillful and unskillful, And I think that that's a really radical, nuanced difference. One means you have zero agency. The other says you have agency. Right? If what you're doing is evil, well, that implies that you are inherently evil. And I realize, and I get it, that there are, please, and I'm not, really, I'm just saying that I don't do that. I'm not Christian. I'm not Catholic. I'm not judging anybody who is. I'm just saying that Buddhists don't see reality that way. That's not how we see reality. So anyway, I digress, and I'll keep on going. So blah 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 blah. It was long before. Okay, it was not long before I quickly learned that Dhamma, as far as mere lip reciting and repetition, I could speak the words of knowledge, the words of the elders, and I could affirm that I knew and saw. I, along with others. I thought, it isn't through mere conviction alone that Alara Kalama declares, I have entered and dwell in this Dhamma, having realized it for myself through direct knowledge. Certainly he dwells knowing and seeing this Dhamma. So I went to him and said, to what extent do you declare that you have entered and dwell in this Dhamma? When this was said, he declared the dimension of nothingness. I thought, not only does Alara Kalama have conviction, persistence, mindfulness, concentration, and discernment, I too have conviction, persistence, mindfulness, concentration, and discernment. What if I were to endeavor to realize for myself the Dhamma that Alara Kalama declares he has entered and dwells in, having realized it for himself through direct knowledge? So it was not long before I quickly entered and dwelled in that Dhamma, having realized it for myself through direct knowledge. There's no middleman, right? There's no book that has at least 40 authors. How do you get it? Through direct experience. So it was not long before I quickly entered and dwelled in that Dhamma, having realized it for my, oh, I already read that, but hey, let's read it again. Having realized it for myself through direct knowledge. And yeah, there is this really great preacher that I adore. And his church is called like Hidden Valley Church or something like that. And he doesn't make videos anymore. They're all like 13, 14 years old. I've even posted them in the Western channel in here because he's Christian. But he's, I don't know how Christians would feel about what he's saying. But where am I going with this? It has something to do with what I was just saying. Oh, he talks about this, right? So it's not like this is just a Buddhist idea, right? I think that, Bill Donahue is his name. He talks about this, that and in his church, they do this. They come together in meditation. They enter in Buddhism would be called the Dhamma, but I'm not Christian, so I don't know what they call it, but he talks about Kundalini. So there's this kind of appreciation for, some Eastern tradition that kind of came before Christianity, while also kind of, he's Christian. He's a Christian preacher, and I love to listen. Great. Give me 1 second. Yeah, just Bill Donahue. Yeah, go to YouTube, type in Bill Donahue. He's from New Jersey. It's like SD, like standard def. It looks like it was shot back in the late 80s, early 90s, but I think it was made in the early 2000s. I could pretty much listen to him all day long, and I realize this might make me sound like a whack, depending on how you feel about him. I have a very Alan Watts relationship to him, where I remember being a young woman, and my father introduced me to Alan Watts, and I remember just spending so many of my days in my early 20s just devouring Alan Watts, and now I devour him on YouTube. And I kind of have that same reaction to this guy, where there's just something that feels so logical, and I don't know, but I hope you enjoy it. So what time is it? Oh, dang, man, I gotta get off this call. Holy cow, I went over. I reckon I gotta go. Yeah, this is like my 17th episode, and this is why I'm only on page 82, because I spend so much time talking. Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for being here. And, if you ever, I do this every Friday at the same time. You can listen to previous episodes. It is on YouTube, but it is unlisted, so. And if you ever want to read or share or whatever, you're always welcome. And thank you so much for being here. I guess on that, I am going to stop my recording here and probably just bid you adieu. All right. Be well. Thank you so much, and take good care of yourself. Bye.